A few years back, my friends and I were at our church late at night playing D&D. Our friend Brenton was the son of the pastor. His name was Robin, and he was not only our pastor, but a licensed exorcist as well. It was 5 of us kids there. Brenton, Scott, Zach, Quashawn, me, and also Brenton's dad was in the building. My mom showed up later after D&D, making for a total of 7 people in the church. So us kids were tasked with turning the lights off all throughout the building. We ran around getting it done and decided to meet up in the chapel upstairs. That chapel is tiny, with only 4 pews on each side meant for younger kids. When the last light for the chapel where we had met up in was turned off, the atmosphere did a complete 180. Things felt different to me at least, but to my friends not so much. They laughed, joked, and focused on scaring my mom. We sat in the chapel room for a bit waiting, asking the typical, "If anyone is here, please reveal yourselves," requests. Of course, there was nothing. It made me a little upset, as my mom and I love the paranormal, and to not get anything right off the bat was disappointing. Robin, Brenton's dad, suggested that we go next door to the nursery's kid playroom. We agreed and made the 10-second trek. My mom didn't like it. She had been taking photos before with the flash on, hoping to catch something, but was refusing to do so at that point. She said she was afraid of seeing something. When we asked for a sign from anyone who might be present, the smell of vanilla perfume filled the room. You're probably thinking that it was just my mom's perfume, and I don't blame you, but no. She can't use perfume, as she gets sick when she smells it. I asked Robin what it could be, and he told me that back in the 50s, there had been an employee who worked in the nursery. She had worn vanilla perfume to work every day, and older people who had known her could confirm that. We decided to walk down to the main chapel, which was huge, by the way. We sat in the middle row of the first 2 pews. Kids sat in the second. The 2 adults in the first. All of us kids started feeling sick, like we were about to puke. Brenton's dad noticed this, and suggested that we go to the basement for one last try, and that after that we should call it a night. We all thought, why not, and decided to go. We sat in the basement on the couch facing toward the wall, which was a good distance away since the whole basement was actually a dining hall with a kitchen next to it. Next to me on the couch was my mom, Zach, Quashawn, and Robin. Brenton was actually still sick and laid out on the sofa chair in front of us, while Scott laid on the floor playing with his phone. Quashawn started snapping photos non-stop. I swear he took over 100 in the basement alone. With every photo taken, there was a red haze that seemed to grow brighter and brighter. Then we heard clicking. It sounded like a light switch coming from the storage room. We were all like, "I'm not checking that out. Send Scott." He shrugged and went to go check. Sometimes I think he wants to die, but really he just doesn't care about anything remotely scary. He walked up and discovered that the storage room light was turning on and off by itself. He called back to tell us that he thought someone might be in the room. Robin stood up and told him to open the door. Scott did as he was directed, and sure enough, the light was on, but no one was in there. Scott closed the door and walked back, laid on the ground, and got back on his phone like nothing strange was going on. Quashawn was back at it again snapping photos, until one of the images made him pause entirely and say, "Hey Robin, can you look at this?" Robin grabbed the phone, chuckled, and said, "Yup, that's something all right." My mom asked to see it as well, and then emitted the loudest scream ever before running behind the couch. I asked to look at it, telling her that she had to be overreacting. She yelled at me and for the first time in my life told me to shut up. I looked at the photograph, and right in the middle of the basement, clear as day, was a person standing there. He was old and bald, with a Catholic robe on and a red sash, arms by his side. I couldn't make out anything below his knees. I saw facial features and everything else, though. I looked up, terrified, fear of what I saw rushing through my body. I screamed, jumped up, and ran toward the corner. Robin rushed and turned the lights on, making my mom feel safer. We called it quits and went upstairs. We found old photos of the priest in the church's photo albums. Robin asked me to point out the man that I had seen, and I did. It was the exact man from the basement photo, but instead a much older photo of him when he had been alive. Robin agreed that he did indeed look the same, and so did Quashawn, along with my mom. We packed up the D&D game, put everything into the car, and we all drove home. Sadly, we tried to recover the photos and transfer them to a computer, but all of the files showed up as being corrupted. After this experience, nothing else has happened, at least aside from one instance. Our friend's dad was leaving the church, so we did one last game night with no ghost hunt, where we played D&D for 6 hours straight. This was only a year ago. We were packing up the car. Everyone was outside talking. I walked to the front of the church, just reminiscing about all the good times that we had there, and how it felt like a chapter of our childhood was coming to an end. That's when I saw a black figure in the bell tower. I stared at it and knew that it was staring back at me. I looked at it one last time and walked back to the car without telling anyone. We missed that church every day. I stopped going after Robin left. One day I was sent to clean up the nursery with no help. The whole time I was in there alone, I felt as though I were being watched and didn't feel safe. I ran out for the last time when I heard a little kid giggling in the playroom. I wanted to start this off with a trigger warning, as it does speak of suicide. There isn't any detail of how this person died, but I know that this subject is hard to read about and listen to for others. Back in 2018, I met a really sweet girl at my church, and we became pretty good friends. We would sit by each other or nearby every service. We attended canned food drives to help others around Thanksgiving. We sat together with a few older couples at church lunches, but we weren't close outside of that. At one point, we had each other's Snapchats before I deleted mine. The week before my birthday, I went to church as normal, ate breakfast with another friend of mine and her kids, and made my way to the sanctuary. I saw Lily sitting on the right-hand side of the aisle, and I sat next to her. We talked for a bit before the service started. However, halfway through, she got a phone call and left. She didn't come back, so I figured that she had had a family emergency or had to go to work early. I finished up at church, talked to my pastor and his family, and then headed home to give a couple piano lessons. Nothing else odd or weird crossed my mind. I just carried on with my week until next Sunday. The following Sunday happened to be my birthday. I was excited because it was my golden birthday, the year of 25. I don't usually like to celebrate, but this was gonna be a good one. I'm a newlywed spending the day with my husband and having my favorite coconut cream pie instead of cake. I still wanted to go to church that morning, though. I love my church and church family and spending time with them. From the minute the church doors opened, everything was off. I went down to the basement and had a cup of cold coffee, a bagel, and I noticed a few people around me who were just pale, cold. I can't even properly describe the sadness on their faces. I'm a pretty introverted person, so I didn't ask any questions. I just went back upstairs to the sanctuary and waited for the service to start. My pastor walked up to the podium with tears in his eyes. He began telling us about how there was a tragedy within the church. Lily had committed suicide the weekend prior, Friday night to be specific. I started crying uncontrollably. I didn't know that she had been dealing with thoughts of suicide, and I felt like an awful friend. We had a beautiful service dedicated to her before her funeral. We all sang songs that she loved, prayed for her mother and family, and prayed for her. I left right after church. I went straight home. I didn't think about the details of her death because it just hurt too much. A few hours later, though, I remembered the previous Sunday. I had seen her at church. How was that possible, though? She passed away Friday night, but I somehow saw her on Sunday. I sat right next to her. We talked before service started. I watched her answer her phone and walk out. I became angry, scared, disappointed, depressed, every emotion that comes with losing a friend at such a young age. I fell into a hole. After I had grieved and prayed for a couple days, something came to me. My church does live streams, and there would have been a clear view of our service and us sitting next to each other. I logged onto my Facebook, found my church's page, and started searching for the date that I had last seen her. The strangest part of everything is, every live stream is in chronological order, so I figured that it would be pretty easy to find. But to this day, I still haven't found it. I asked the person in charge of recording and uploading the sermons on Facebook where it was, and he said that somehow that there had been technical difficulties that day, and that they were unable to stream the service or even catch any audio. This has racked my brain for months. To this day, I feel as if she had been there on church that Sunday to say goodbye to me. I asked other members if they had seen her the week before, and they all said that they couldn't remember if they had, or they corrected me by saying, "Honey, she passed away last Friday night." There's no way she could have been there. My church is fairly small, and we only have a morning Sunday service, so there's no possible way that I could have gotten my days mixed up. I've had many ghostly encounters in my life. Way too many for me to even count. I'm going to continue to write about all of them, because writing about it honestly is the only thing that brings me peace and sanity. This one hits the hardest, though. I wish I had more answers than I do, or some sort of proof, but I don't. I didn't have any eerie feelings when I last spoke with her. She didn't feel like a ghost or an apparition. I feel like she was truly there, without a doubt. I hope that one day I can find some answers, or an explanation at least. But for now, I have to keep telling myself that this is how Lily decided to say goodbye to me, and learn to be okay with it. My dad was a pastor at a church for 4 years. Many people had died in this church before we got there. Over the course of these 4 years, some of the craziest, inexplicable stuff happened. I'm here to tell you a few of the best stories. My parents went to Maine every year. I had gotten tired of the trip and decided to stay home. I went over to the church to grab some snacks from the back of the old sanctuary. There were 2 sanctuaries. One was about 90 years old, and the newer one was about 50 years old. Anyways, I went to the back where the snack booth was. Mind you, this was the middle of the day, so it was completely lit up through the stained glass windows. I bent down to grab some drinks from the mini fridge under the counter. When I stood back up and turned to walk out, I saw this figure standing in the doorway. It had no nose, mouth, eyes, or ears. It was just a bald head wearing a long, dark robe. The moment I laid eyes on it, it vanished. It's safe to say I ran out of there as fast as humanly possible. Another time my cousin came over to spend the night at my house. We wanted to play PS4, but the other controller was over at the church. So we walked over there through my yard. It was pitch black out. When we opened the door, we might have made it 2 or 3 feet in before we heard the loudest, spine-tingling scream that I have ever heard coming from the back of the new sanctuary. We ran back outside and back into my house so fast. My cousin was on the verge of crying and kept saying that he was never going back into that church again. The church had a preschool in it. They would change out the toys in the classes every now and then so that the kids wouldn't get bored of them. One time the teacher took one of the kids upstairs to help her pick out some toys for the rest of the class. The old classrooms upstairs were used for storing said toys, extra chairs, and old desks at the time, so there was no one else up there except for the two of them. As the teacher was grabbing the toys, the kid that she had brought to help said, "Hey, look at those kids playing with the toys over there." These are just a few of the experiences that people have had. I could sit and write out hundreds of paranormal experiences linked to that church, however, if I had the time. In Europe, medieval churches can have grims. Grims are the spirits of animals that were buried inside them to be their guardians forever. I'm an occultist, as in studies the secret properties of things, not will sacrifice your goat to Satan, and a paranormal investigator, and thought that it would be good to pack a grim on a trip to a local church that seems to have attracted some weird entities. So I said a prayer asking for any grims of redundant churches with nothing better to do to pop in when we got there. As my team and I walked through the field ahead of this church, I said the prayer again, and there was a gust of wind contrary to the direction that the wind had been blowing in the whole time thus far. It was also much stronger than the pre-existing breeze. It moved the tops of the nearby trees with an audible whomp sound, and tore away a few loose branches. The gust didn't come from anywhere. It just appeared suddenly where we were. I don't think it traveled far, though frankly I was more impressed with the entrance than watching it. The grim could no longer be heard after a few minutes of trampling the grass, but I assume it was a good thing. I'm 90% sure that the church I work at is haunted. I work in the church nursery, to be specific, which is part of the original church, which was built in the early 50s. They now have a detached main building for the adults, and my building is the youth and nursery building. The church also owns a house right next door that was built in the 60s, maybe the 70s, which the youth leader gets to live in. I've been working in the nursery alone for almost 4 years now. I also babysit the kids of the youth pastor in their house next door. At the nursery we have mainly very old toys made in the 70s that somehow still manage to work. I've never even replaced the batteries in these toys. After Sunday school, everyone in my building except me and my kids move over to the service building, so the kids and I are completely alone. I only have 2 kids at a time since we are a very small church. Without fail, at 11 a.m. every Sunday when youth leaves the building, I will have the same 3 toys randomly start making noises. I know the kids aren't the ones making them go off, since at 11 we have snack time, so we're all at the table. At first I thought I was crazy, as it would only ever happen while I was alone with the kids. Until last year, that is. Last year we got a new pastor, and his wife decided that she was going to work in the nursery with me since the youth pastor had a newborn. We wanted extra help just in case we had a situation go down that required 2 people. Well, the toys began going off with her present as well. She didn't seem to think anything of it. Once the pandemic started, she no longer works with me, and I'm alone watching just one toddler. When it's just us, I'll hear talking, footsteps, and doors opening or closing. I don't normally feel any bad vibes coming from whatever is in the church, though, so I leave it be. Now let's talk about the house next door that the church owns. This house, I actually am slightly scared of. Things are always falling and breaking in that house. The first thing that comes to mind is 2 years ago. The kids and I were in the living room playing, and all of a sudden we heard the sound of glass breaking. We searched the house and found that all of the light bulbs in the bathroom were shattered. I freaked out to say the least, but apparently stuff like that happens all the time over there. Another time, I was changing the baby's diaper in his room. He has sliding doors on his closet. He was fussy, so I was singing to him when all of a sudden I was hit from behind. His closet door somehow fell on me. I put his door back up and into the brackets, and maybe an hour later we went back to his room to get his shoes so we could go play outside. As we were making our way past the closet door whilst leaving, the door nearly fell on the baby. Thankfully, my reflexes were quick enough that it landed against my arm instead, bruising me pretty good. I told his parents and got a very nonchalant, "Huh, weird." Then comes to last night. I was bathing my 4-year-old son, along with a 1-year-old, while everyone else was next door at the church. All of a sudden, a canvas picture frame fell off the wall in the hallways closest to the bathroom. I'm pretty freaked out. I fixed the picture and got the kids out of the bath. As I was trying to get the 1-year-old ready for bed, he wouldn't stop shaking, crying, and looking into the corner of his room by his closet. He was absolutely terrified. I have never seen this baby so frightened. He's usually really very happy all the time. We immediately left the room, left the light on, and went into the living room with one of the other kids. I told his parents again, and they just said, "Yeah, it happens sometimes." I'm starting to get worried, and I'm afraid to go to work. I work either at the church or at their house at least 4 days a week, sometimes more. I'm starting to no longer feel safe. Since the pandemic, the church my parents attend has been recording their Sunday morning worship earlier in the week, and then the minister will edit and publish it on social media on the actual service day. This past Wednesday, we recorded the worship music. I'm one of the 3 singers that we have, and my mom is the pianist. While in the middle of recording our first song, we all hear a man yell, "Stop." I look over in the direction that it came from, somewhere off stage to my left. See nothing, and then we just finish up the song. After we finish the song, one of the other singers goes, "Did you hear that?" All 5 of us, including our other instrumentalist, my mom, and the 3 singers, all said yes. The saxophone player was suggesting that it was a wrong note that we had played, or possibly a weird squeak as the building settled. None of us were really convinced, though. Fast forward to this Sunday. My mom and I watched the service and realized that the noise couldn't have been from the sax because the sax has a microphone and would have been very audible on the video. We noticed where the 2 of us looked over at the noise, and we even replayed that section a couple of times with the volume raised. Both of us could hear it, just barely, beneath the sound of the music. This was by far the freakiest thing that I have ever experienced in that church, and none of us will ever be finding ourselves alone in that building again. This happened today at a church that I took my grandma to. I haven't been since I was a kid, and figured it might be nice to go again. At first, the church seemed very homey. I come from a small town in Kentucky, but live in a city now, so I really enjoyed the change of pace. A lot of people at the church also used to live in Kentucky and still have family there, which made it feel as if there were a small piece of home right there with me. The service was short and simple. They started out with praise and worship, followed by prayer. After the prayer, they opened the side door and invited God, the Holy Spirit, and His angels into the church. Then they had an evangelist come in and preach a sermon. I was getting weird vibes at this point for whatever reason. I figured it was because I hadn't been to church in so long, and it had to do with a few personal reasons from my last church experiences. I was sort of zoning out while the evangelist had the stage. He got really into his sermon. He was yelling and putting his arm out toward us. Mid-screaming/preaching, his microphone messed up, and it made him sound demonic and loud. I know technical issues like that can happen, so I didn't think anything of it. He changes his microphone and carries on. While he's going on again, there's knocking at the side door, and all of a sudden it just flies open. I initially chalked it up to the wind, but the lights began to flicker as he continued talking. Everyone kept praising God and saying that the Spirit was in the church. They really seemed to enjoy these things that were happening. After the service was over, the preacher's wife went up to the podium and said that while all the weird stuff was happening, that she could hear everything upstairs. She also said that while she was up there, that she saw things running past out of the corner of her eye, and that a door had been slammed in her face. Not quite sure what to think of all this. I've never experienced anything in a public place like that, and definitely never expected to in a church. Like I said, everyone was really into it, and said that it was God, or angels. I'm an open and spiritual person, and have experienced a lot of paranormal, but I didn't feel that whatever that was a good thing. I felt bad vibes before things started happening. Vibes that I continued to feel up until we left there. I have a story of the first time that I saw a ghost in full body manifestation. It was to the point where they looked human. I've had other encounters and experiences before, and all were shadowy horrors, but not this ghost. It almost felt like a guardian angel, so this was very strange. When I was baptized, I was told to walk into the back area of the stage where I would wait to make my entrance into the baptismal pool. As I opened the door from the back area, I was greeted by a guy who was wearing a Hawaiian shirt and a straw fedora, holding a towel. He was just sitting there on a wooden box with a cane. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but then I realized that he was sitting at least 3 feet from the ground with his feet in the air. I figured that he must have been a spry old man, but at the same time I was confused as to why he was holding a cane in the first place. He handed me the towel and told me not to worry and not to be nervous. It was very warming and relaxing hearing him tell me that. Afterwards, I heard the cue for my name and went out, and I was baptized. When I was done changing, I walked into my minister's office and asked who the guy was. She had no idea who I was talking about, but as she said that, I immediately noticed a portrait on the wall of the man who had given me the towel. In the portrait, he was wearing a suit instead, but the face was definitely the same. I pointed at the photo and said, "Him. Who's that guy? Is he the chairman of the board?" She said, "No, he's a founding member of this church. He passed away a long time ago." I was so baffled. I told her it had to have been him, that it had just happened no less than 20 minutes ago. I went back to the place where he was, and there was a shelf of blankets and towels sitting on top of the box that he was sitting on. All I could think of in total shock was that there was no way that old man had propped that up there by himself in the last 15 minutes, and I quickly prayed and thanked him. After that, I've never had a similar experience. I still only ever encounter negative energy-driven entities in shadows, not pure ones, like him. Years ago, during a church event that I was forced to attend, we all had a terrifying experience. The setup was that boys slept anywhere they wanted to downstairs, and the girls were free to sleep wherever they wanted to upstairs. Some rooms were locked off, however, as the church was being renovated at the time. Anyway, it didn't matter too much, because we were just a small group. Night rolled around and us girls migrated into the nursery while most of the guys crashed in the indoor gym/basketball court. Only one guy couldn't sleep. Above the basketball court are windows to another room that was locked off, and the guy kept seeing flashing lights as well as the silhouettes of people looking at him. He didn't stay in the gym for very long. About the same time, myself and the other girls were still in the nursery. At that moment, we were playing apples to apples. The door was closed, and next to it was a one-way window. Inside was like a mirror. It was so that kids didn't see their parents coming to check on them and make a fuss. Well, I started hearing banging and scratching on the door. I freaked out and looked up to see two grinning faces staring back at all of us. Remember, we were on the mirror side of the one-way window. One of us bolted toward the door, and we heard stomping down the hall, but no one was there. The pastor came up screaming at us, saying that we were all just imagining things. We know what we saw, though, as well as heard, and all of us refuse to go back. I only know this story because it was told to me by a family member. I don't have much recollection of it myself. When I was younger, my mom ran an old people's home, so we lived there and I knew a lot of the people who also lived there. When I was about 4 or 5, my family and I used to love going to visit different towns and cities, check out all the landmarks. I can't remember which town it was, but we visited the church there. We were just having a look around, as you do, when suddenly as I was looking across the pews, I saw a lady. She was just sitting there, not bothering anyone at all, but apparently I burst out crying and started begging to leave. Once we got out, I'm told I kept saying that it was one of the ladies who lived in the home that my mom ran. The issue was, she had died a few weeks prior. None of my family ever saw her. The only thing I remember properly is seeing her and just being absolutely terrified. I have no idea why, but I do remember the fear itself. It was real and very intense. I still see things on occasion. Sometimes the fear is there, sometimes it isn't. I used to go to this one church that wasn't too far away from my house. I had gone there for years before noticing anything. One day I was at the church with a friend. It was just her, her husband, and I. There was no one else in the entire building. We were in the gym, and I heard what sounded like a cabinet door slam in another room. I got up to check and see if anyone else had come in without us noticing, but everything was quiet and empty. I was confused and tried convincing myself that maybe the pastor was playing a joke on us or something like that, though I had no idea why he wouldn't reveal himself if it was him. I walked all the way through the church, never running into anyone else. The next week it was the same scenario. Just the three of us, alone in the church yet again. I was up in the sanctuary, not doing anything important, but just playing around on my phone. I looked over toward the front where the podium was and noticed what looked like a shadow walking across the room. I'm not sure if these things are easily explained away or if these were actually paranormal experiences. What do you all think it could be?